Welcome to Osquery office hours, everyone. It's mid-March. It's about a year since the pandemic began. Hopefully, y'all are holding up. And yeah, so moving on to agenda. Probably the biggest announcement is that we did cut the 4.70 tag, and I imagine we'll talk about that down in the agenda to see what else is there. Not sure we have any other notable announcements, but if anyone wants to pipe up with something, now's a fine time. Next section is sort of questions, issues, PRs to discuss. The intent here is for any community members that got any questions, want to raise anything, anyone need help with anything. Okay, moving on to agenda. So 4.7.0 release, I figured we should probably check in on the state of that. I am amused that one of the things I had to do is rewrite my release generation script because we have now crossed 100 commits. So it's kind of a cool milestone. So that's pretty cool. I think that the state of this is that we're waiting for a new Windows signed binary, and then we will upload to the website and call it good, or at least call it, unstable.
Yeah, is that waiting on Nick then?
I think that's waiting on Nick. Does that sound right, folks?
I generate the ARM packages today, and then I really have to look into the AWS onboarding procedure.
I can go over that with you after this if you want.
Yeah, if you have the time, sure.
Yeah, I have probably about an hour after this meeting.
Hey, Nick.
Hey. Hello.
Nick's on mute.
Muted, of course.
There we go.
The theme of the last year is you're on mute.
Welcome, Nick.
Hey, everybody. Thanks.
I think we were just saying that you're going to regen the Windows MSI.
I am
and
actively doing it. That's
Nice.
actually why I'm late.
I mean, whatever. Thank you for all the things you do.
Well, absolutely. The hope is that I'll be a lot faster on this in the future. I am finally sitting down. I wrote a lot of PowerShell last night trying to more automate this build process. And I'll publish this script whoever wants it, happy to give it to them. It's just doing a really clean build and signing everything and packaging it all up. And then my next plan was to try to get my testing steps also like pseudo automated, so that way I don't have to spend as much time going through this to make these faster. So
I know there's a bunch of CPAC stuff, so I don't know if you can touch base with the CPAC folk, and which is
it's
throwing Stefano under the bus.
No, it's like we have a really great build system. It's just like I want something that I can run one PowerShell script and then wake up in the morning and it's all built and signed. Like the builds are fine, it's just a matter of like getting where the binaries are, making sure that they're signed correctly, moving everything to a folder so I can walk through each one and test it, right? It's just a bunch of smaller things.
Okay.
This should be covered by the new packaging system we have.
Yeah.
To make things better, hopefully.
Yeah. It was one of those things that I probably should have written this script like a year or two ago. And it's almost like I'm writing it way too late now. Because like we're going to try to move to the new packaging pipeline anyway. So I don't know.
But I mean, we had issues with how things are packaged right now. It's basically impossible to do the signing process in a separate manner. So
okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will be helpful for the near term at least. But yeah, I should have those binaries. I had one small bug with sign tool. It's just being a little finicky for me, and I should have those up in a bit, hopefully a little bit later today.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I don't know if there's anything else people want to talk about 4.7.0. One thing I added to the changelog is I started tracking how many contributors we had. I thought that was a fun little shout out. So I stuck that into the changelog. I don't know if anyone noticed.
I think I missed it, but let me check. That's really nice.
It's maybe 21 or something, if I remember right, for this release.
That's nice.
So anyhow, that's all I've got on 4.7.0. I haven't done any testing. I'm not sure anyone else has yet. So that's there. Zach, you added run queries at load.
Yeah, I have a vague memory that this was discussed recently, but I've been talking to folks who want the ability for scheduled queries to run when they're first loaded and then again at the intervals. Is that something that like rings bells for anyone?
We had an implementation of this in Launcher, so I don't know if that's what you're remembering.
I do remember that it was sort of custom implemented within Launcher.
So the implementation in Launcher, I went and tried to fix it about a year ago and discovered that it wasn't a good fit. There are some issues in the way Launcher implemented it. I would love to see this. So, you know, if we figure out a good way to do it, I think that'd be cool. I wouldn't want to do them all right at load. I'd want to come up with like an accelerated splay time. You know, something like on load, run everything within the first 5 minutes, and then, you know, I don't know what it would look right, and then splayed out across time. Mostly because I feel like queries can be pretty intensive. So trying to run, you know, an entire query pack feels pretty painful. But
Yeah.
I'm
Ted?
unsure what the sort of desired user experience is. Like maybe it's that people want to just pay as much performance as possible to get all of these queries run as soon as possible, and that the guarantee that they all ran is much more important to them than the system staying at a certain performance metric. The thing to keep in mind is that if you run these serially, like the most you'll ever take is about 1 core. That's not exactly guaranteed because there's nothing to say that each query implementation is single-threaded, but for the most part, you can make the assumption.
So it sounds like there's generally agreement that this is a reasonable feature to add to Osquery, and the question is maybe how to manage the performance aspects of it.
so
Or just being
Teddy, you asked why would you want this?
I think the next step would be like just being absolutely sure what people are asking for when they say that they want this. And
I can tell you kind of why Collide does something like this, right? Which is that we want to, when a machine enrolls, we want to generally fetch a large amount of information from the machine to early populate various UI elements, right? Like here's the list of machine information. And we have this set on a not too frequent update cycle, right? Something like every 12 to 24 hours. I don't know, it changes. But when a machine enrolls, we don't want someone to wait those 12 hours before they see anything. So we actually kind of want to accelerate just right at the beginning. And the way we do this at Collide is we end up managing a bunch of stuff so that during a very early enrollment, a lot of this information gets pulled over the live queries interface, the distributed read interface, and then it falls back to using the schedule. But it's a little bit weird to manage the intersection of these two across, if you imagine diff things, like it gets very hard to think about reconciling, how do I get a faster refresh on this diff query? So there's a lot of kind of stuff where we've just accepted imperfection. And it's part of why the Collide actually played with doing an initial like after the enrollment, doing an initial set of queries on the scheduled queries. So Launcher had some code in it where like any scheduled query that started with _collide would get run very early on. But it didn't work super well for probably not very exciting thrift reasons. Having native support inside Osquery that did the right thing for counters and diffs sounds great. And I would imagine like a configuration parameter on the query of like accelerate in the first n minutes or something, you know, and make sure that you get information back. And then you could say, oh, not this query, but maybe these. And I don't know, maybe that's overthinking it. I think I care mostly that in the early phase, we don't melt a machine with, you know, an entire query pack, and that you then be able to say, I want an initial load of this data because I want to populate all of this stuff and conditionalize it and do cool things. But then, you know, trail off into a normal update cycle because like no one is going to sit here and reload for, you know, an update.
Yeah, and I think that we have similar use case in Fleet, and it's not an issue right now because we just use 100% live queries. But I'd love if we had this feature, we'd be more able to migrate to using scheduled queries and differentials for keeping track of that kind of host state. And I'd love to be able to do that. But then I think, you know, kind of externally from the fleet manager perspective, one context that we heard this in was someone's got relatively ephemeral instances that say run for an hour or two, and they have queries that they might want to run on like an hour or two interval. Like that's how often they want updates, but they do want to be sure that it runs at least once while that instance is up. So that's their concern, I believe. Maybe we can, since it sounds like there's maybe some generally agreement that there's generally some agreement that that folks might want this. Maybe we can open up an issue and to discuss the specifics of the use cases and what would make a sensible implementation. How does that sound?
I mean, if you want, or you could put up a PR.
Or put up a PR. Well, and I agree with Ted, like, let's understand what people want first so that whatever we do achieves the goals.
One of the things I found myself wanting, which I haven't put any effort into implementing, is a per query epoch, which is sort of similar but sort of different.
I'd like that as well.
So I'm trying to think through what could go wrong here. And the only thing that comes to my mind, which is probably a limit to my creativity, is the infamous watchdog. So you can put a time before the watchdog starts. So it's called watchdog delay. And then you just have to complete all your queries before that happens. But I think this is just another use case for why it's good to have an API between the watchdog and the worker to say like, hey, the user requested that we run all scheduled queries initially, wait to apply performance constraints before I'm finished.
Well, except you'd want some performance constraints. You definitely would want a per query performance constraint, right? That's one of the things that's on the watchdog. So I think you're right that there's a dragon here.
Ted, you're suggesting though that the watchdog could maybe be more aware of what the worker process is doing.
Yeah, that was a conversation from a couple weeks ago, which was just like, how do we go about doing that? So I'm kind of bringing that back to scope as something we might want to figure out in tandem with this.
Yeah, I mean, I buy that. I buy that for sure. I think there are a number of cases where it could be useful for the watchdog to have more context of what's going on.
I was thinking about using perf to look into the, or even BPF to look into what the worker is doing. Or we can also inject checkpoints in the binary.
Zach, actually, speaking of epochs, if you imagined wanting to run a query early on boot, would you also want to run it early after an epoch increment?
Maybe so. Yeah, I think probably.
I think
I'd
so.
Because I'd say an epoch increment is saying I want new results for this query
Just sort of thinking
on
it.
its normal interval, and if its normal interval is that at load time it gives the results, then I think that would match it. But again, I'd be happy to discuss these kind of semantics in an issue as well. It's a good question, Seth.
So if you want to take on opening an issue, I'm happy, tag me in it. I'm happy to dump our use cases in. And I think it would definitely simplify our fleet management side and probably yours as well.
Yeah, great. And I'll reach out to other folks who've been asking about it and see if I can get their input in the issue as well.
Yeah, if we talk about it, I think there is a really interesting intersection with per query epochs and something in the like rethinking epoch and schedule and that, and I can kind of wrap my head around that, but I can't wrap my head around the watchdog. Luckily, there's more people. Anyone else on queries at load? If not, moving on, turning off build test in dependencies.
Yeah, I think that's mainly present in just OpenSSL. So the issue is talking about disabling OpenSSL tests so that, building OpenSSL tests, since we are currently not running them and they take quite a good portion of time. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not as easy to run them on the CI and understand if the results are correct, especially for OpenSSL tests. They are still obviously useful to be compiled when, for instance, you update the OpenSSL library. This is something I have done. But again, if I recall right, there are tests that fail and are okay to fail, but you have to check them manually. Yeah, beyond that, all the other dependencies I know about, we manually specify which source code files have to be compiled. So in theory, all the tests should be excluded.
If you think it's reasonable, I think it's fine. But I'm kind of happy to just defer to Stefano on this one.
Yeah. No, I mean, sorry. I mean, I know that Teddy was wondering about the usefulness of those tests. If he, do you agree too?
I guess if we're not running the tests right now, then it's sort of a moot point. I do like the idea here of keeping them around and building them in certain scenarios. Like the examples that you mentioned, I think are very strong for why we should keep them around, but maybe not run them by default. Yeah, I like that as a good compromise.
Yeah, we can definitely put an option to disable them. Yeah, and make it disabled by default. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Ted, I saw your comment on the issue regarding possibly catching things changing from compiler flags and that kind of thing. And to that end, I mean, I don't know how much work this would be, but to me, it seems like it could be a great idea to do similar for any libraries that we use, and then maybe there's a long CI job pre-release that happens that runs the tests for everything using the compiler flags that we have enabled, and then we can have an understanding of whether any changes have taken place that would do that. Not sure if that's how much that costs in terms of time for someone to implement versus what we're going to get from it, but
Yeah, in the words of the great Mike Arpaia, like, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on that. But I think the SQL, the OpenSSL ones are worth it, just because there's some examples of compiler optimizations breaking some of the security guarantees from OpenSSL. I think, because those examples exist, then it's definitely true that other libraries are going to break because of these optimizations and changes, but I don't care that much.
Or if the other libraries have tests that would catch it.
Yes. The real complexity here tends to be like, we build parts of the libraries, and to get the tests, you need to build like the rest of the libraries, which often include linking binaries and pulling in more dependencies. So it ends up being quite a slog if you would want to turn this on for everything. Yeah.
Does one of the things that I feel like comes up occasionally is questions about whether we can cache or not build all of the dependencies and all the CI runs, and I wonder if that is a direction here.
That's where we came from, and the road is paved with very deep spikes.
Well, yeah, I honestly, it's partially a time problem, but meaning I think right now we are in a good position in the sense that although there's a good amount of work to update the libraries from source, we are always able to build them from source. So when we know that when we can regenerate them from source. That being said, actually, we were definitely thinking of giving an option of building pre-built libraries. So obviously, that has some issues with giving tools or adding logic to understand when those pre-built libraries have to be rebuilt, but they are definitely useful in the case of CI, or if we ever want to, again, try to use legitimate LGTM. So, yeah, it's just that, yeah, there's a bit of time to take reasoning and changes to do in the CMake logic so that we can better split things. Yeah. So yeah, I think definitely it's something we eventually want to have.
I guess the biggest issue there is Windows, because it is really slow to build. I think that's would be the main reason.
Yeah. But in some cases, it will also reduce slightly the build size, because you don't have to keep all the object files for those libraries. Yeah.
So I've got a couple things. If we seem like we're kind of done on that topic, and I've got a couple things I could talk about if people want to hear about them. One of them is these sort of weird Windows thrift errors, which I haven't actually gotten back to debugging. I think Teddy and Mike both had some good suggestions on that ticket. But I think there's something weird, and Teddy, you were thinking it might be related to some watchdogs there. And I'm not sure, but I kind of want to, I think my next step is probably to build an extension that just sleeps a variable amount of time and see, one that sleeps and one that will like spit back a megabyte of data, see which of these breaks everything. As I think there's something very weird on that socket. And, I also have this sense, and it's very fuzzy, that like one of the Windows Defender antivirus things wants to scan all things that go over the socket because it looks like file I/O. I'm not sure about that yet, but like I see on my Windows test device, I see the antivirus stuff doing a lot of work, and I'm not real sure why. Nothing happens on the machine other than socket communication with Osquery. So I see there's some stuff, and I don't know. I don't know if anyone's dug into this much or.
Well, I'm interested in keeping our extensions supported since Trailbits has a few, and so I tend to weigh in on these things. I'm interested. I'm trying to help. Don't know if we can get to the bottom of this, but
I'll try and make a table. I'll try and make an extension that Teddy might have been interested in the next item. Oh well. I'll try and make an extension that can sleep for a variable amount of time and also return like large data in various dimensionality. It's pretty easy. I just haven't had a chance to write the test case, and we can see if we can replicate the what's going on.
yeah. Or we can try configuring the extension watcher to be less aggressive.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with it. I'm wondering, like, how does the extension watcher decide when it's time to kill an extension?
No, that's documentation PR right there.
Well, it's mostly I should go read the source code.
Probably, I don't know, but I would guess it's probably the same as how it works for the worker process, which is it queries the processes table, looks at how much CPU and memory it's using, and then kills it if it's over the limit. But that's just a guess.
Well, I guess it doesn't have separate thresholds from the OS query watcher itself.
I don't think so. I never.
If they share the same thresholds, that would be interesting to know.
So sounds like there's an area here for us to explore.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing I could tell people about is the general state of ARM64 support. So as some of you might know, there are various external parties that would love it if there was ARM64 support more officially in Osquery. Great, someone else can write this down. Thank you, whoever's typing. And ARM support mostly happens in my free time, which is very scarce. I'm sorry, everyone. So the crux of the problem is that we have currently chosen GitHub Actions as our CI system. This isn't a terrible choice, but it is a choice. And GitHub Actions does support hosting your own runners, but there's a lot of very thorny security implications in doing that. And working through infrastructure to support running our own workers in a proper security context has been non-trivial. It's just kind of a lot of glue. And as I tug on the threads for this, there's been a lot of things to improve and learn. So I have now tested, okay, so it's kind of like the setting. So some things I've explored. I've explored running CI through Amazon's code build, which is Amazon's CI thing. I am not convinced it's a better choice for us under any means, but it did work. I got a build that failed at about the point I expected it to fail because I wasn't using a proper version of CMake. So, the thing started and ran and then failed. So that was great. I think I'm hesitant to go down that route because it's a second CI system. So like, I don't really want to port all our CI to using Amazon's code build because that just feels like a big change. You know, any process change is big. So like maybe we could do it for like one platform, but that starts to feel awkward. So I don't know if I love that plan. The other possible direction here is to run GitHub runners in AWS. So I've been idly trying to get that going on. And in that vein, I've been learning about AMIs and building AMIs that would spin up a GitHub runner and then be able to run the builds, which kind of has meant learning more about GitHub runners, which are these like hideous pile of .NET and JavaScript code. So that kind of is going along. I now have AMIs, and I can at least manually run them, and I haven't baked through the security configs and tokenization. Probably one of the things I have to work through is basically like, where do the credentials come from, and how do they get limited from the test run, right? Because from inside the test run, you don't want to be able to escape and get credentials. So there's this sort of chicken and egg there that I have not wholly figured out. So I've been playing with it a bit over on directionless /Osquery. And some interesting other things that fell out of this is I have created new builder images. So there's a PR up in the Osquery toolchain repo. I think it's still a draft that has a make file and a Docker file that creates a builder image. I moved it to there from the Osquery repo because that felt a little bit more natural. And it takes about 2 hours to generate the Docker containers right now, so I don't want to put that into CI. It's kind of like a sprawling bunch of little things, but it's kind of a sprawling project. I don't know if anyone has any questions, specifics that they want to know about. Commiseration.
If there's any way to for us to help.
I have no idea. The thing that I'm sort of so if this were my full-time job, it would be like working through a bunch of how do we glue these pieces together and like how do we get stuff going. And if our broader community had, you know, someone who could sink more time into it, especially in the context of like more knowledgeable in AWS stuff, that might help. But like I don't know that anyone in this room has that background. And that's kind of why I've just been slowly plugging away.
We actually had Tim since the start of the meeting, but he had to left for a conflict, and he is now missing the ARM CI card. But I told him he will be able to take a look at the recording. Apparently, he knows AWS.
Possibly, you know, I could work with him, and yeah, it's sort of I'm happy to like figure out how to give someone an account in our little AWS corner, or maybe just have them review the things, because like everything I'm doing is in PRs. So there, you know, there's just a lot of. It's kind of like Osquery compiles. I mean, at least I think. I haven't actually finished a build, and I assume the tests all run, right? So like the porting work is fine, and it's now just how do we glue CI systems together?
Yeah.
Like the best possible answer would be if Amazon said to GitHub, here's 1,000 million runners, just make this go already, right? But like Amazon's not going to give GitHub those resources, and GitHub isn't going to just do it. So I think it's like everyone has to struggle on their own. Anyhow, that's the state of that. People might be amused to go read the Osquery toolchain Docker file I put up. It has a pretty amusing final step. I don't know how many people are familiar with Docker's multi-stage builds.
Where is that? Where is that, Seth?
Used a couple of times.
So the Osquery toolchain repository.
Oh, okay.
is where a lot of that moved to. So I kept it in line with that. So one of the, if people have written Docker files, right, you often see these like long shell command lines, run apt-get, upgrade apt-get, update apt-get install 7,000 things. And the reason they're all together is because how Docker does its layers. So the official answer to that is to use multi-stage builds. So in one build, you might just have each of those called out as separate lines, which is pretty clean. And then the next stage, you sort of carry forward whatever you need from the prior stages. And you can use these multi-stage things as a way of collapsing layers and thus freeing up final disk space. The other advantage is you get better recoverability if commands fail in the middle, right? So if a command fails in the middle of a Docker file, it'll pick up from the last good layer. So the Osquery toolchain build, the final layer basically just copies the root file system over, thus collapsing all prior layers into a single layer, which is a little bit special, but we basically need all of /USR. So it was fun. You can take a look at that. It works.
Wait, I mean, you just said earlier, you said that it took 2 hours. I was thinking, so this is the toolchain only. I was thinking that it's actually in line with the build on x86. So previously, I was thinking. Previously, I was thinking you were talking about the build of Osquery itself.
No, just the CMake. Building CMake on a Docker X
CMake,
ARM64 emulation takes about 2 hours.
Okay, yeah, no, never mind.
Without that CMake build, it's like 3 minutes.
Okay. Whoa.
But presumably that only needs to be built pretty rarely.
This is a Docker file.
Am I misunderstanding?
No, this would be built very rarely.
Okay.
Okay. This Docker builder, this is the builder that CI uses to build Osquery. So it only changes when the toolchain changes or when we feel like regenerating the builder. So it's pretty rare.
Got it.
And we would be able to stop building CMake if CMake fixed their RPM bug or if we fixed their RPM bug.
Yeah, to be fair, I thought of carving some time and proposing a PR because it shouldn't be too difficult. Maybe the issue is how exactly to do that, because I don't know. Simply, I would think if the option, because there's an option you can give where the pre-trunks or post-trunks option, if it's empty, the bug is that if it's empty, they still put the directive, but you could instead say, well, if it's empty, there's no reason to put the directive. But it's I'm not sure if it's
the CMake bug that introduced the CMake PR that introduced this is like 20 lines, and it looks trivial to slap an if statement around. But I can't write CMake, so like I don't know. But yeah, I'm a little surprised that no one has picked it up. But anyhow, that's the state of that stuff. Probably I should actually get y'all to review the Docker builder PR, and then when we do that, we can also drop the trail of bits provided image and move to an Osquery provided image, because I can actually build and upload into the Osquery Docker Hub. And it's a multi-platform one, so that's also kind of nice.
sounds good.
And I don't know. Other than that, if you know anyone who really likes AMIs, I can point them at my AMI code. They might have suggestions. And Alessandro, after this, you wanted to talk S3, right?
Yeah, I have time. Yeah, I'm building now the packages, so when you're ready, can put them. And I will also have to make a pull request to the website to update the blog post for ARM.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick.
That's all I've got on agenda. So unless anyone's got anything else, I think that's it. Have a happy Tuesday, folks.
I'm
Your
gonna
son
run
as
then.
well.
Thanks, y'all.
You too.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.